The U.S. Supreme Court has finally decided the fate of President Donald Trump's trade agenda. More than $175 billion in U.S. tariff collections could now have to be refunded after the court ruled against Trump's broad emergency tariffs. Small businesses sued to block Trump's tariffs last spring. Analysts had initially expected a swift ruling from the highest court, but the uncertainty has dragged on for longer than expected. That decision likely to rattle the global economy. In announcing their ruling, the court said the president exceeded his authority and that the Constitution very clearly gives Congress the power to impose taxes. The 6-3 decision handing Trump a significant loss on an issue crucial to his economic agenda. For more on this, I'm joined in the studio by our international affairs editor, Kethevane Gorjestani. Great to see you.
Hi.
So we've teased out a little bit. What more can you tell us about the decision by the Supreme Court?
Well, look, this is really a huge loss for Donald Trump, especially when you look at the decision. It's a 6-3 decision, and two of the conservative judges who ruled against him are conservative judges that he appointed himself. So this is clearly the justices there, even the Trump appointees saying, no, we're not going to go there. This is not within your powers. And basically what the court said in the majority opinion is that, as you said, it is Congress that has the power to collect taxes. And they say that the government knew that because they didn't go after just putting tariffs. They invoked this IEEPA, which is, of course, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, in order to give itself the power to use and to put those tariffs. And what the argument was from the government was that there was a national emergency, whether it was the flow of fentanyl, immigration, or even the trade deficit, and that emergency is what gave it the power to impose tariffs. Not so, say the judges. They say that the IEEPA, what it does, it gives the government the authority to regulate, to ban imports and exports, but not to put tariffs on these imports or exports. And therefore, they're saying you went above and beyond what authority you have, and they really made it complete and clear. And that's why it took them so much time, because remember, those oral arguments, they took place back in November, and everyone was expecting some sort of quick end. And now we finally have that decision from the Supreme Court.
Right. And as you said, these tariffs are such an important part, of Trump's economic agenda. So what happens going forward?
Well, look, there are a lot of questions as to what happens going forward. The first one is, of course, what you mentioned, which is the refund. What happens? And the estimate is $175 billion. How are these companies who paid those tariffs going to be reimbursed by the U.S. government? There's going to be a mad dash to get that money back, and that's going to cause quite a lot of problems. The second thing is that Donald Trump has used these tariffs as a sort of bargaining chip for trade deals with different countries around the world. What happens to those deals that are underpinned by these tariffs? Are those countries going to come back and say, well, now that those tariffs are gone, maybe that trade deal doesn't exist anymore? That's going to be a question going forward. The fact is, though, that not all tariffs have been erased. The tariffs from the U.S., the 60% of them are those tariffs under the IEEPA. Those are the ones that we're talking about that have been ruled out. That does not mean that all the tariffs go away. For example, sector-specific tariffs like tariffs on steel, tariffs on aluminum, those things are probably going to stay in place. And there is a possibility for the government to go and use other laws to impose tariffs, but they are going to be much limited in scope. They're going to take more time. Donald Trump could also go to his fellow Republicans who have control of Congress and ask them to go through the normal legal channels to try to pass a law to implement those tariffs. But that is going to be more complicated because there are a lot of Republicans actually who are very much traditionally opposed to the idea of tariffs because they think that it is a tax on the American taxpayer and they don't want to see that. So it is still possible for Donald Trump to go ahead with parts of his tariff agenda, but he's not going to be able to use it as much as a bulldozer or a bargaining chip going forward because of that ruling.
Kethevane, thank you so much for keeping us updated. That's Kethevane Gorjestani from our International Affairs editor.